Poems to a Listener, readings and conversation with contemporary poets.
In the morning light, a line stretches forever. There my unlived life rises, and I resist, clinging to the steps of the throne. Day lifts the darkness from the hills, a bright blade cuts the reeds, and my life, pitilessly demanding, rises forever in the morning light.
Welcome to Poems to a Listener. I'm Henry Lyman, and in this half-hour program, we'll be visiting with poet Louis Simpson and listening to poems drawn mostly from his book, People Live Here, published by Boa Editions. The poem we just heard describes one's unlived life or future as pitilessly demanding as it rises forever in the morning light.
It doesn't allow me to rest. It keeps demanding that I get up and act. And it is a poem, I suppose, about being pulled reluctantly into life in the morning. The pitiless part of it is that I have to work, that I have to write, I have to do this, a compulsion that I have to follow.
Do you think that has anything at all to do with your war experience and the demands of the wartime situation?
Well, I think that's possible. I hadn't thought of it before, but for 3 years I had to rise very early before the morning light. During the war, of course, you slept anywhere you could. You could drop asleep in any position at any time, because we never got enough sleep. The battle. Helmet and rifle, pack and overcoat, marched through a forest. Somewhere up ahead, guns thudded. Like the circle of a throat, the night on every side was turning red. They halted and they dug. They sank like moles into the clammy earth between the trees. And soon the sentries, standing in their holes, felt the first snow. Their feet began to freeze. At dawn, the first shell landed with a crack. Then shells and bullets swept the icy woods. This lasted many days. The snow was black. The corpses stiffened in their scarlet hoods. Most clearly of that battle, I remember the tiredness in eyes, how hands looked thin around a cigarette, and the bright ember would pulse with all the life there was within.
Life seems so concentrated here, in that ember, in that cigarette end.
This is Bastogne, the end of December of 44. And what you did feel was that life was flickering out day by day. There was no help. We were cut off. And the poem does capture that feeling that life was being cupped very carefully in the hands. Of course, I grew up in the tropics, so being in a division cut off in the middle of winter in Belgium was rather...
After Jamaica, it was quite
a long way from Jamaica.
How did that change you, do you think, in looking back at it?
It had a rather liberating effect on me. After the war, I had a sense of having touched base in that war experience, and that, in a sense, I'd been born anew, and that I had had my own life in my own hands and had managed to survive, and that therefore I knew something and was free. On the lawn at the villa. On the lawn at the villa, that's the way to start, reader. We know where we stand, somewhere expensive. You and I imperturb, as Walt would say, before the diversions of wealth. You and I engagé. On the lawn at the villa sat a manufacturer of explosives, his wife from Paris, and a young man named Bruno, and myself, being American, willing to talk to these malefactors, the manufacturer of explosives, and so on, but somehow superior. By that I mean democratic. It's complicated being an American, having the money and the bad conscience both at the same time. Perhaps, after all, this is not the right subject for a poem. We were all sitting there paralyzed in the hot Tuscan afternoon, and the bodies of the machine gun crew were draped over the balcony. So we sat there all afternoon.
What is the attitude of the American here? Seems quite ambivalent.
Yeah.
He's able to talk with these people, but he doesn't really want to, does he?
Well, he's polite. He takes part in the conversation, and then he gets angry with them for being callous and exploitive, and angry with himself, too, seeing himself, ironically, as someone who thinks he is superior morally, but really is someone who's sitting here with these people. I think that many people find themselves in that situation. The inner part. When they had won the war, and for the first time in history, Americans were the most important people. When the leading citizens no longer lived in their shirt sleeves, and their wives did not scratch in public, just when they'd stopped saying, "Gosh." When their daughters seemed as sensitive as the tip of a fly rod, and their sons were as smooth as a V8 engine. Priests, examining the entrails of birds, found the heart misplaced, and seeds as black as death, emitting a strange odor.
Everything must have seemed just dandy after World War II, in a certain sense. I mean, we were on top of the world. It was a big success story. But the heart's misplaced.
Yes, I felt that, yes. The country was on the wave of material prosperity following World War II, forgetting its origins. This poem was written in the early 60s, before the war in Vietnam, and I had a sense that something bad was going to happen. I think we were getting vibrations already from Vietnam, and in any case, we were starting to become militarily involved in foreign adventures, and I had a real sense of this. The border. The time is after dinner. Cigarettes glow on the lawn. Glasses begin to tinkle. TV sets have been turned on. The moon is brimming like a glass of beer above the town. And love keeps her appointments. Harry's here. I'll be right down. But the pale stranger in the furnished room lies on his back, looking at paper roses, how they bloom, and ceilings crack.
Everything seems just fine in this small town. But someone, the boarder here, some stranger, sees it quite differently.
I always felt in American small towns a tremendous contradiction between the very look of the town and how I felt. Long Island, is where I live, is a very good example of it. I always felt a constraint of the imagination by these little tidy houses and neat rooms. I always felt that, well, yes, people like to live in nice rooms, but I always felt a terrible closing in.
Claustrophobia.
Claustrophobia.
Yeah. And there seems to be a crack in the structure somewhere.
Yes, there's a crack in the structure, and I think that if one were to explore such towns, one would find that behind these facades there's a lot of distress and a lot of tragedy. American classic. It's a classic American scene. A car stopped off the road and a man trying to repair it. The woman who stays in the car in the classic American scene stares back at the freeway traffic. They look surprised and ashamed to be so helpless, let down in the middle of the road. To think that their car would do this. They look like mountain people whose sun has gone against the law. But every night they set out food, and the robber goes skulking back to the trees. That's how it is with the car. It's theirs. They're stuck with it. Now they know what it's like to sit and see the world go whizzing by. In the fume of carbon monoxide and dust, they are not such good Americans as they thought they were. The feeling of being left out through no fault of your own is common. That's why I say an American classic.
It's a common scene, common feeling. How do you mean that it's a common feeling to feel left out through no fault of your own?
I meant that Americans grow up, I think, believing that they are in the majority. They themselves belong to the majority, and that things will go well if they do the things that they tell you in high school you're supposed to do. Later in life, a lot of people find out that they're quite ruthlessly thrown out, yes. And I think this happens to people in this country, partly because, I suppose, we begin with such an idealistic idea of the country. It's our country.
And it's for us. It's for the people.
It's for
That's
us.
what we're
and
taught
then we
to
find suddenly that we're on the outside.
Yeah. With that freeway.
Yes.
Which goes roaring by, and we seem to be standing on the sidelines when we're supposed to be in it.
That's right. American dreams. In dreams my life came toward me, my loves that were slender as gazelles. But America also dreams. Dream, you are flying over Russia. Dream, you are falling in Asia. As I look down the street on a typical sunny day in California, it is my house that is burning, and my dear ones that lie in the gutter as the American army enters. Every day I wake far away from my life in a foreign country. These people are speaking a strange language. It is strange to me, and strange, I think, even to themselves.
America seems foreign to you and to others too, you think?
At this time, this was written during the war in Vietnam, and I felt at that time that what the administration was doing was completely foreign to my wishes, and I felt that it was an aberration for Americans to be doing what they were doing.
The poem reverses the situation between the United States and Vietnam, of course. The American army is seen by you, by the speaker, coming in and burning an American town.
Yes.
And leaving your loved ones killed or wounded.
Yes, and I think it is.
Remarkable.
I think it is really doing that because obviously if it's doing that over there, it's laying up a future in which it's going to happen here. I have no doubt that we lay up for the future by the actions we take right now. And if we're going to set roofs on fire with cigarette lighters and then machine gun women and children, we have destroyed our own moral position in the world, and someday it'll happen here. No question in my mind at all that's how it works. After midnight, the dark streets are deserted, with only a drugstore glowing softly like a sleeping body, with one white naked bulb in the back that shines on suicides and abortions. Who lives in these dark houses? I am suddenly aware I might live here myself. The garage man returns and puts the change in my hand, counting the singles carefully.
The strange place this night. Could be anywhere, but the houses, strange. And strangely enough, you feel that you yourself could live in any one of them. Do you sometimes feel that you could be anyone in a certain sense?
Oh yes, I felt that often. And I feel that I do live really in one of these houses. I have lived in the American middle class all my life. The word middle class, of course, has an enormous range, but I've lived in these houses and had marriage, children, and done the things most people do. And in fact, that's what I write about.
Yeah.
The pawn shop. The first time I saw a pawn shop, I thought sheer insanity. A revolver lying next to a camera, violins hanging in the air like hams. But in fact, there was a reason for everything. So it is with all these lives. One is stained from painting with oils. Another has a way of arguing with a finger along his nose, the Misnagid tradition. A third sits at a desk made of mahogany. They are all cunningly displayed to appeal to someone. Each has its place in the universe.
Random objects in the window, like all these random lives. But are they really random? I mean, the poem suggests that each has its place.
The collection looks helter-skelter, but if you were to take each object out of the window, it would have a history of its own. It's only that they're thrown together that makes them look so meaningless. If you were to take each out of the window, take the camera, the revolver, the violin out of the window and examine its past, you'd probably find that it has a very interesting past and is an individual.
So it is with people.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's a very moralistic poem in a way to say that every life has a place in the design of things. But when I write something, I push it toward a point, conclusion. And therefore I tend to think that the universe is run that way, that somebody's writing the universe.
Yes.
That God, after all, is supposed to be an author.
Yeah.
And
so all these things are cunningly displayed to appeal to him, perhaps?
yes, he's supposed to be the author of our being. He's writing all the time. And he's writing stories all the time. The Running Woman. I was getting my front brakes fixed at Danny's Foreign Automotive. Danny's father, who drives the customers back, pointed to a woman running on 25A. He said that she'd been divorced, that the court took away her children and awarded them to the father. That's what you get, he said, for fooling around. I've seen her running on highways, in side streets, along the water, and back again to the highway, at any time of day, and in all weathers, sometimes twice a day.
She's almost timeless. I see her everywhere.
And she's driven.
To make up for the loss.
Yes. She's driven to run, and you know, most of my poems come out of real things, things I've seen or heard. And when I'm lucky, something goes directly into a poem. And then sometimes I have to rearrange things a lot. This is one of them that just came straight into the poem.
She ran right into it.
Oh, yes. She still runs by. In the suburbs. There's no way out. You were born to waste your life. You were born to this middle-class life, as others before you were born to walk in procession to the temple, singing.
Are you addressing yourself here?
Yes, I'm talking to myself. This poem is quite often misinterpreted. People think that I'm comparing the uninteresting life of the middle class now with some wonderful religious life of the past. Actually, what I meant was that the people now in their middle class life are walking a pattern which, if they could see it, would be just as sacred or as important as the life of the people who walked to the temple centuries ago. The unwritten poem. You will never write the poem about Italy. What Socrates said about love is true of poetry. Where is it? Not in beautiful faces and distant scenery, but the one who writes and loves. In your life here, on this street, where the houses from the outside are all alike, and so are the people. Inside, the furniture is dreadful, flock on the walls, and huge color television. To love and write unrequited is the poet's fate. Here you'll need all your ardor and ingenuity. This is the front, and these are the heroes. A life beginning with hi and ending with so long. You must rise to the sound of the alarm and march to catch the 6:20. Watch as they ascend the station platform and, grasping briefcases, pass beyond your gaze and hurl themselves into the flames.
So you see stories then perhaps in their lives, the commuters' lives, their certain heroism.
Yes, you notice at the end of the poem that I do not get on the train myself. I watch as they ascend the station platform. But I do feel that this is my material as a writer. It's their lives, what they do and say.
It's a challenge to write here, particularly. I mean, here in the suburbs.
Yes. Suburbs is an interesting word. It includes now all these places where people live in between great cities. It's spread for miles and miles. A lot of people live in these places. And what they do is very typical of American life. And this is what I try to write about in a serious way. I write from the point of view of one who shares that life, you see. In Otto's basement. At the meeting of the village board last night in Otto's basement, when they were discussing a building violation, why hasn't the building inspector reported? The village lawyer is waiting to hear from him. The inspector has to be told to get off the pot. A picture drifted into my mind from some Latin American country of men tied to posts about to be shot, or perhaps it was Africa or Afghanistan. So we endure it. This is what Jefferson and Lincoln had to endure, sitting and listening to people argue the cost of conversion from oil to coal and the statement by the tree trimming committee. If you want to know what freedom cost, look for us here under the linoleum. Dig between the end of the table and the wall of some brown material grained like wood with imitation knotholes.
This little town meeting could seem like something quite trivial, especially in contrast to the pictures that cross your mind, the atrocities you see. And yet, it really isn't.
No, this is the basis of democracy. And it's very boring. It's very boring sitting through those meetings, and that was what I was trying to say.
Right,
You know, if you want to know what freedom costs, you'll find me buried under this linoleum, you know.
And behind the fake wood with its imitation knotholes.
Yes. Rather than being buried in some country where they've just shot the last government and buried them 6 feet under.
Right.
See, that's the image. That's the contrast.
Yes. So it's not trivial at all. On
No,
the
it's not.
contrary,
No.
It's our salvation.
Yes. I think this is what is unusual about America, obviously. The foggy lane. The houses seem to be floating in the fog, like lights at sea. Last summer, I came here with a man who spoke of the ancient Scottish poets, how they would lie blindfolded with a stone placed on the belly and so compose their panegyrics, while we, being comfortable, find nothing to praise. Then I came here with a radical who said that everything is corrupt. He wanted to live in a pure world. And a man from an insurance company who said that I needed more protection. Walking in the foggy lane, I tried to keep my attention fixed on the uneven, muddy surface, the pools made by the rain, and wheel ruts, and wet leaves, and the rustling of small animals.
There are three responses to the foggy lane. One is blind praise, in a way, the other being purity. The radical wants the world to be a pure one. And then the insurance man tries to sell you some protection. But you respond differently.
They're all looking for abstract answers. Mm-hmm. They're all looking for a way of handling experience that'll make it a formula. And I am keeping my attention on the material world, the physical world.
The concrete.
Yes, the concrete.
The way the water looks, and the pools.
And it's an uneven, muddy surface.
Yeah. Not easily definable.
No. Frogs. The storm broke, and it rained, and water rose in the pool, and frogs hopped into the gutter, with their skins of yellow and green, and just their eyes shining above the surface of the warm solution of slime. At night, when fireflies trace light lines between the trees and flowers exhaling perfume, the frogs speak to each other in rhythm. The sound is monstrous, but their voices are filled with satisfaction. In the city, I pine for the country. In the country, I long for conversation, our happy croaking.
We've been visiting with poet Louis Simpson and listening to poems drawn mostly from his book, People Live Here, published by Boa Editions. I'm Henry Lyman. Thanks for being with us.
Poems to a Listener was produced by Henry Lyman in cooperation with WFCR Amherst, Massachusetts. Financial assistance was provided by the Massachusetts Council on the Arts and Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Massachusetts Foundation for Humanities and Public Policy.